Good morning, everyone. What a great opportunity to be here. In 1992, Rabobank planted a seed in a food and agribusiness research team. Back then, the team was small, located in Utrecht. But over time, the team started growing across different regions. Today, RaboResearch has 90 analysts across the globe, making it a true global team. Today, in North America and around the world, we are very privileged and very proud to have some of the very best analysts in the industry. Our research has evolved over time and with technology. We continue to provide unique market insights, but now we are also investing more resources on data and analytics. Combined with our unique expertise, allow us to generate unique strategic insights. Today, some of my colleagues from RaboResearch, along with some of my colleagues from the commercial side, will discuss with you the emergence of a fork-to-farm environment. That is, how consumers are impacting many links across the supply chain, even the farm level. In order to do this, and as Harjan mentioned, we'll have two panels. The first panel will focus on the consumer side. This panel will discuss the changes that we are seeing in consumer trends and how these panels affect companies in this space. Then we'll move to the second panel to discuss some of these implications on the agricultural side. Both panels will have a Q&A section at the end, and we encourage you to participate, to ask questions at the end of the session, but also you can send your questions throughout the app as the panel is happening. So I will leave Nick Fereday to take it from here. I hope you really enjoy these panels. Thank you very much.
Good morning, everyone. It's certainly a great pleasure to moderate this panel and this conversation with you on consumer trends. And super excited to introduce to you all my colleagues and friends who, like me, aspire to become your trusted advisors. We have Paula, my collaborator, who works on food service, on restaurants. Our very own philosopher king, Steve Rannekleiv, on all things beverages. Tom, our go-to person on dairy in North America, if not the world. And as Pablo likes to say endearingly, least but not last, our new chairman, David, who heads up the banking on the global consumer foods and beverage side. So I'm going to just kick off with a few brief observations before we begin our discussion. I'm told there's a delay in the slides, or maybe I'm not pressing it right. I'm going to risk it. It's funny how the technology never works, right? Okay. So what should be happening right now is a very cool graphic of a spinning globe, and within this globe, oh, there we go. So this is a nice graphic really showing some of the trends that we're seeing right now being played out. And the circular image is actually highly relevant because it reminds us that a lot of trends are not linear. The story is never linear and simple. It's often evolving, revolving, and quite complicated. And similarly, the globe is a great reminder that many of the trends we see being played out here today in the US are actually being played out on the world stage. And some of them originate in other parts of the world. I think Bill, Justin, we have you Australians to blame for avocado toast as a trend. But as you can see, there's a lot of things that we could be talking about, and time is pretty limited. So we decided amongst ourselves just to focus in on 4 trends. And I'm going to talk about mission-driven as the first trend. And by that, I'm talking about the values, the mission statements of companies, particularly emerging markets. And I only need to be brief, because we all saw yesterday the 6 awesome food bite companies. And it's really very self-evident that the mission is a real core part of their business model and not just copy for the website. These companies are driven, their motivation goes beyond the profit motive to promoting a wider social and environmental sustainable agenda, kind of profits with purpose, if you like. These small companies have caught on very, very quickly that the consumer today is increasingly looking for brands and companies that align, that share their values, that they have aligned values with. Beyond that, there are other companies that we've been dealing with, former Food Bites cohort members such as Seal the Seasons, that is donating 20% of its profits to help fight food insecurity in the US. Similarly, Health Warrior, which has just joined the second cohort of Terra, is a food company on a mission to change the world through food, recognizing that to build a stronger society, you need better nutrition. And of course, it's very easy to be cynical of these very high and lofty goals. And we've made the joke in the past that a lot of mission statements of companies kind of put some of the world's religions to shame in their ambition. But we think, certainly the 4 of us think, that this is an important development. And what's particularly interesting is how food companies, the larger players, are also beginning to enter into this conversation also. Witness now how they're beginning to walk away from their industry association, the GMA. Witness how Nestle is selling its North American candy business, in part as it transitions to being a health and wellness and nutrition company. But I'll leave the last word on this to my personal favorite, and if Steve Martin was here, he would certainly approve. The company Ahold Delhaize, which is an international retailer, they do Stop and Shop here in New York. They have humor as one of their core values. In their words, we are humble, we are down to earth, and we don't take ourselves too seriously. I mean, how cool is that? So with that, I will pass on to Paula. What are you going to talk to us about, Paula?
Thank you, Nick. I am going to talk about, I'm going to talk about a few trends and how e-commerce addresses them, because e-commerce has been something that has gained a lot of relevance in terms of the impact it's having on all of us on a day-to-day basis. So one of the big trends is convenience, the desire for convenience. And this stems from a little bit from the fact that our lives are even more fast-paced than usual. Our eating is more snacking or on the go than an actual sit down 3 meals a day. And given our dependence on cell phones, we're so used to getting everything at the tip of our fingertips, whether it's just looking for information or actually purchasing anything, basically. You can purchase anything today from your mobile. So convenience and the search for convenience is one of them. The second trend that is addressed by e-commerce is the search for novelty and personalization, customization. We have gotten more and more used, and this has been a little bit led by millennials, but it's something that we've all sort of embraced, to getting content that is personalized to us. It's not a sort of boxed concept where we just take what's given to us, but we can choose our settings from Netflix or from whatever it is we're consuming. And it's the same with our requirements for food and for shopping in general. And the third trend there has to do with the search for information. The search for information and transparency, or the desire for it. Consumers, especially in the case of food, are becoming much more educated and much more demanding in terms of they want to know what the food is, how it's made, who is the company that is making it, and they demand that all of this information is easily available. And so all of these things are things that come together in e-commerce as a way of like satisfying these. And now I don't have to talk a lot about e-commerce to tell you how big it is. It's taken the world of retail by storm. This Thanksgiving weekend, I was reading there were more people that shopped online only than offline only. 20 billion was sold online on the weekend of Thanksgiving. The holidays are probably going to be more than that. But the truth is that in food, it has lagged a little bit. Food has been slower to move online. And this makes sense. In a way, food is harder to move online. As we all know, it's perishable. It requires cold chain, so the delivery is a little bit harder. People also like to choose their fruits and vegetables. So sometimes they don't trust somebody else choosing them for them. But the fact that it's a low percentage doesn't mean that it needs to be ignored, because it's actually growing very fast, and we expect it to become much more important. And companies know this, a lot of people know this, and we've seen a mushrooming of companies in the past few years come up trying to address this sort of like need for convenience and desire for convenience on the side of the consumer, bringing you food to your doorstep, whether it's meal kits, Blue Aprons of the world, or whether it's Instacart, Fresh Direct. We've seen a lot of companies mushroom in this sector, and not all of them will survive, clearly. We're already seeing some of the big players struggle, actually. Blue Apron is having quite a... I read today that they just let their CEO just step down. But it is a big space that everybody is trying to get into. And it's not just the new companies. Traditional companies in food service are getting into it. Domino's is leading. Amazon, as we all know, has gone in very hard. So everybody's fighting for this sort of a spot in this new frontier. And so the key message I want to leave you with, because I feel I'm running out of time, is you need to think about what this means for your business. So this resonates a lot with what Gary Vee was talking about. This is happening. E-commerce and food, as hard as it's going to be, as many obstacles as it presents, it's going to happen. And so whatever your business is, whether you're in retail, manufacturing, primary production, you need to think about how you can position your business to succeed in this space and claim your spot. So whether it's product design and packaging for better delivery, whether it has to do with how you're going to spend your online marketing dollars, or your relationship with retailers and the Amazons of the world.
Great, thanks very much. Steve, I feel we could spend 3 minutes contemplating the awesomeness of your Dude report, but what have you been working on since then? What do you want to share with us today?
Yeah, thanks, Nick, and thanks, Paula. And this does come directly from the Dude report. Awesome. Nick and I worked on a report a few years ago and looking at changes in the market, and one of the things that we noticed was this increasing consumer interest in new small brands that resonate with consumers, and the ability of these brands to really quickly scale up and take share from flagship brands. And I think that that's as relevant today as when we wrote it, if not more so. And where we see this, the space that I look at, the beverage sector, this has completely transformed the industry just in the last few years. A great example that I often like to look at is the spirits industry, where you go back to the end of 2011, and the market was dominated by brands that had been around for forever: Smirnoff, Bacardi, Absolut, Jägermeister. But at the time, there were a couple of small brands that were barely on the radar screen. And, in 2011, I'm guessing that hardly anyone in this room had ever heard of Tito's Handmade Vodka or Fireball Cinnamon Whiskey. And, if you're older and you don't have kids in college, you still may not have heard of Fireball Cinnamon Whiskey. But you fast forward to 2016, and, at the end of last year, these two brands have absolutely exploded onto the market. They're now some of the largest selling brands in the market. They've taken share from all the established leaders, whether it's Smirnoff, Bacardi, Jägermeister, Absolut. They're all under pressure right now, and these brands have resonated very well with consumers. And so the challenge becomes, if you're a large brand owner, it puts a lot of pressure on you to get out there and reconfigure your portfolio. So Nick, you and I have spent a lot of time looking at this, the fact that nearly every major food and beverage company out there today has a corporate venture capital fund, and they're all investing in these small brands. And the challenge is when some of these brands become, they generate some critical mass and get some growth going, they can really, the valuations of these brands can really take off, and you see some strong valuations. And we looked at, earlier this year, we looked at a few deals that have been done in the beverage space where large companies have bought relatively small brands for over $1 billion. I mean, these are really healthy valuations. And we wanted to get a sense of the scale of that, because it seemed like a big number to us. So we kind of compared it. These are small startup companies. They don't really have much EBITDA. So we looked at them as a function of revenue, because it seems to be what's happening a lot in the craft space. And the brands that were bought were by Ballast Point, Casamigos, and Brewdog. And if you look at kind of valuations of well-run spirits companies in terms of their revenue, market cap to revenue runs at about 5 times. If you look at these brands that were acquired, they were acquired at an average of around 12 times. So 2.5, the valuation is 2.5 times more than kind of a well-run large company, and some of them even more. Like the Casamigos one was done for nearly 20 times revenue, and you kind of go, well, are they overpaying? Diageo buying this, 150,000 case little tequila brand for $1 billion, are they overpaying? And maybe yes, maybe no. They'll, hindsight will be 20/20. But I think that's not really the question. The question is, in any acquisition, there's risk. Right now, for these large brand owners, there's a much bigger risk in not doing anything at all when your leading brands are hemorrhaging volume.
Okay, great. Over to you, Tom.
All right,
What are you
so
seeing?
I have the easy task of telling you what's healthy. And I guess really it's up to you. It's what seems to be the model these days is the consumers deciding on their own what's healthy. Science is becoming increasingly irrelevant, and whoever your last friend on Facebook to comment on the matter is now defining it for you. In the case of butter, it's been an interesting story, and it's really had a big impact across the entire supply chain. 100 years ago, my grandfather ate 3 times, well, probably not 3 times the amount of butter that I ate, but 3 times the amount of butter the average American eats, which is about 1/4 of a stick a day. Margarine hardly even registered on the map. And then we saw Ansel Keys come out and say, hey, you know what, these saturated fats are bad for you, and vegetable fats are actually good. Margarine shoots up, butter falls down, and then for the next, 30 years or so, margarine reigned supreme and butter hardly even registered. And there's big implications across the supply chain, across our industries. We saw margarine brands popping up left, right, and center. And then we saw the fat is bad fad come across to vegetable fats also. And the mantra was fat makes you fat. And actually sugars are good. So consumers went to sugars. And then we saw sugars come up and all fats came under pressure. And now more recently, we're saying some fats are actually good for you and you want some fats in your diet, but others are bad. So trans fats have been banned by the FDA, and some of our saturated fats, polyunsaturated fats, some of these other ones have come back into the limelight, really helping out butter and helping out some of the other animal protein spaces. And it's interesting how businesses react to this. McDonald's is a perfect example of somebody who was part of the conversation and aware of this trend evolving as it developed. And they adjusted their supply chain. Within 6 months, they added butter to their menu items, which is, I mean, when you think about the scale and size of McDonald's, that's an impressive adjustment. And they called on their largest suppliers who aligned with them, and they increased their output by 10% of butter production, and it called on 2% of U.S. butter production to meet that supply shift. It sent record prices to record highs, and consumers didn't stop. They continue to grow, to eat and consume more butter despite these higher prices. Now, the point I want to make, though, is in this case, science has had a bit of a role. But when we look more broadly at what's happening here, science is playing an increasingly less relevant role in the matter. And this is actually a case in point where it's kind of folded in on itself. It was cool butter was okay 100 years ago, then it wasn't okay. It's okay again. It confuses consumers, and I think consumers are starting to second guess mainstream science, and they're looking to alternative facts or whatever you want to call it as their source of what is healthy. And so it kind of gives us a blank canvas to help define what is healthy and be a part of the conversation. And I think it's really important for us in the food and ag industry to be a part of that shaping and molding the definition of what is healthy, because ultimately consumers are increasingly concerned about consuming what is healthy, and we can shape that and be a part of that, but we have to have a supply chain that's ready to adjust to it when that definition comes along.
Okay,
Thanks.
great. Well, some very broad areas there. David, you've been quiet in the back. You don't have any slides, which is part of your approach, your free-form approach to client interaction. Let me just pick up on Steve's theme of, small is sexy. One of the questions I often get asked at meetings and whatever is, okay, what happens once a large company buys one of these small brands, and how do they, as we would say in Britain, not bugger it up, right? How do they retain the integrity, the authenticity of the brand and not mess it up? Do you have any pearls of wisdom?
I think the way to talk about it is through a case study, but the one thing is you're buying growth, you're buying someone who's taken something from nothing in an incredibly short period of time and created a tremendous amount of growth. You put that inside a Fortune 500 company, it's the fastest way to kill that growth. And I'll give an example of an unnamed beverage company that bought a very fast-growing juice business about 15 years ago, and their whole focus was, let's give them access to distribution, let's give them access to all of our marketing efficiencies, but anybody from corporate that wants to go visit this incredibly great startup that we vastly overpaid for at their headquarters needs to sign in on a yellow pad at the CFO's desk. Needless to say, no one went out to visit them, which is exactly what you want. If you buy one of these businesses and you pay these huge prices, if you kill the entrepreneurial spirit, if you kill exactly what's taken them from nothing to something, you've basically overpaid, and you'll destroy all that you basically look to buy. So, I think that's one of the real important things, which is how do you provide them with the efficiencies of size and the efficiencies of market knowledge, certainly in the case of beverages, distribution, but also keep that spirit, keep the management team, keep that focus, their quirky marketing, whatever they might be doing, keep it out of your corporate headquarters, because if you do that, I think at the end of the day, you vastly will have overpaid.
Okay. So just building on the small is sexy theme, in the world of e-commerce, Paula, all we talk about is Amazon gobbling everything up. Is there any room for small companies on the online space, or is it already too late and the behemoths have taken over?
No, it's actually a very interesting question, because the question is there room for them to be a competitor to Amazon, so to them be selling them on their own, but also it's like, how can small brands succeed within Amazon, right?
Yeah.
And so those are two different things. So I'm going to take the second part first, which is, in theory, online lends itself to small companies because the shelf space is infinite, right? You can have as many products there, there's no constraints, and so you can offer all sorts of, it's called the long tail in e-commerce, and it happened with books, so that every consumer that wants a niche product can find it, because it doesn't really cost much to have it available on the online shelf. But at the same time, when you do a search for a product, you only click on the first 3 or 4 things that come up after your search, right? Unless you're looking for something very specific, it does tend to sort of like the smaller products will be pushed out, and the same marketing dollars that were used to pay for shelf space in a supermarket are going to be used to be paid to come up first in the searches of the providers. But you also see, for example, Whole Foods was a company that used to nurture and sort of like try to get a lot of small brands and discover small brands, and Amazon is removing some of that. They're removing their regional acquisition. So that is a little bit scary for smaller brands. But I do think the online space does lend itself for everybody to find what they like, and it's the barriers to entry for companies are easier. And so that goes also in terms of selling. You can set up, and we've seen everything. Yesterday we talked about the Dollar Shave Club and all these other things. Online actually allows a lot of companies, disruptors that are coming in and disrupt the incumbents, because actually you need a lot less capital to go in that. There's the barriers to entry in general. You don't need the advertising budget. So it actually does provide a lot of opportunities for small brands as well.
Okay. Steve, I'll let you have the last word on sexy. What is it about? What is so sexy about all these small brands?
If anybody knows about sexy. No, I think, there's a common theme in a lot of these that have done well. I think at some level they all resonate. They touch on some consumer demand, they meet some need. But, the examples that we looked at, they all touched on something a little bit different. I think Tito's that did really well, there's a sense of authenticity there. There's an actual Tito's behind the brand. There's an actual Tito. It has a sense of place. It's, Texas. It gives the idea of being authentic and handmade.
Local, yeah.
In reality, it's probably about as handmade as a Toyota Camry, but it's mass produced. But it touches on that idea that consumers are looking for. Buy is kind of, you touch on the need, the consumer demands for natural and healthy. Buy, I think, ticked a lot of those boxes. But Fireball, just the opposite, right? Nobody's drinking Fireball to be heart healthy and to watch their weight. This is an indulgence, and it was marketed really well. One guy going out buying shots for millennials, and then they're making it go viral, right? I mean, it was marketed in a way that was easy to discover, and I think that was critical. So they'll all touch on something a little bit different, whether it's authenticity, discovery, indulgence, or health, but they all touch on something that was missing in the market.
Okay, and they're fulfilling an unmet opportunity.
Yeah.
Okay. Tom, just changing the subject slightly, you have the most awesome graph about how we flip-flop and how we cycle between our love or hatred of fats. Do you envisage, the logic of your diagram would suggest that at some point margarine will make a comeback and we'll all be spreading
20 years.
20 years. But and I say that just because we know that things work in cycles, and because there are no one influencer now in how we make our decisions. So, first of all, can you envisage a margarine 2.0, and what would that look like?
Yeah, I think you look at the cycles, and I think there's a good chance that we'll see something come along. Not for the time being, though. I mean, you can't beat. When we're looking for clean label, you get cream and sometimes salt, and that's your butter ingredient. When you start talking about margarine 2.0, you think about the label on that. That's going to be, from a health perspective, that's going to be a struggle to get something across the board. Plus, the flavor components of butter actually are quite difficult to replicate, and I think the margarine industry saw that, and that's one of the reasons we've come back to butter. So I think it's a ways off. I think you could see some spin on it where you're adding some other additives to a margarine, but I think what you're going to end up with is an overly long label that's just not going to resonate. And simply in this market, a simple label is going to dominate, and people want butter. So yeah, give it 20 years, and we'll be talking.
Okay, and Steve, just back to you. We had that image of the world, and we talked about, as Milton Friedman does, that the world is flat in a lot of things. And I'm just wondering, are you seeing, when you travel and meet clients outside of North America, are you seeing similar trends? Are millennials following the same trends in other parts of the world, or is it very different?
Yeah, I think absolutely. When you look out, we see kind of craft beer taking off, probably much more advanced in more developed markets than in emerging markets. But even in emerging markets, the rise of craft beer, people moving away from sugary soft drinks and looking for healthier alternatives. We were looking at the data for China and slowing soft drink growth there, and some of the big brands taking hits, and consumers looking for more natural, healthier alternatives. So yeah, I think these trends are happening across borders, and I think some of the stuff that Gary touched on yesterday is facilitating that, right? I mean, the communication is the world is flat. Social media cuts across borders.
Okay. And so, David, when it comes to emerging markets, this must be terrific news for large food companies, because if the same trends they're seeing here are being played out, then it creates an opportunity for their brands, or do they need to have a different strategy, do you think, in emerging markets?
To make a more bold statement, I think the days of Western brands going to emerging markets and buying companies and thinking that they can operate in those markets better than the local can, I think those days are over. I think there've been, unfortunately, there's a lot of money that's been lost and a lot of lessons learned, and a lot of resumes on the street. I think where the opportunity is that people are starting to realize that there's an absolute need and desire from emerging markets for Western brands, proven brands, innovative concepts, but the locals have incredible knowledge, market knowledge of their consumers, market knowledge of the distribution cycles and the distribution channels. And so looking at the future of M&A or in some of these sectors, I think you focus on partnerships, you focus on joint ventures and alliances, 51-49 arrangements where the local has maybe ownership of the brand in that marketplace, but the strategic and from the Western market shares market knowledge and innovation and technology. So I think there's a lot of these types of more creative combinations that you're going to start seeing in the marketplace versus the sort of standard multi-billion-dollar cash M&A transaction that we saw in the past. And if some people in the audience remember in a different industry, the Lenovo-IBM joint venture back in the late 90s, what they really realized was there was an opportunity to take incredibly strong management in the US with incredibly strong, efficient manufacturing in Asia, and not necessarily do the acquisition day one, but actually do it through a joint venture, work together, shared management teams across countries. And over time, Lenovo bought out the IBM ThinkPad business, but it took 3 years. And it was a process that really gave them a chance to learn the market in the US, learn how consumers actually bought PCs and laptops, and ended up being a very successful transaction. I hope we'll see more transactions like that on both sides of the pond.
And you think Rabo, with our network of offices around the world, are well placed to form these alliances?
Yeah, that's my cue for the Rabo commercial. But no, I really do. I think our global network and relationships around the world really position us incredibly well to help all of you think through this. As I said, this is not identifying a target, how much do you pay, and write the check anymore. It's about how to actually take the best of both partners. Everybody brings something to the table in these transactions. It has to be a win-win. And in my experience as I've traveled around the globe, the relationships and knowledge that we have both on the far side as well as the banking side of the business really help us, hopefully help you, think about some of those opportunities about how to grow your brands. So.
Great. Paula, I'm going to bring it back to you to talk about convenience. I mean, it's not a new subject, but what is driving all this desire for convenience? Are we just very lazy now when it comes to food, or are we too busy, watching every episode of Stranger Things all one night that we don't want to cook? Or what's driving all this need or perceived need for convenience, do you think?
I don't think it's laziness. I just think Stranger Things is really good.
All right.
No,
I
mean, I think the truth is, as you say, convenience is not new. It's just that more and more, we have things that we used to think were convenient, and now it's like we've just moved into a faster world, right? So, for example, the greatest example for me is breakfast cereal, and I'm sorry if the people from from Nature's Earth are here, but what used to be super convenient, which was a bowl of cereal with milk in your house very quickly, nowadays that's very inconvenient. You can't take it on the go, you can't take the milk, the spoon, you want a cereal bar, right? So it's just like, yes, things have gotten faster, and we're used to getting things that are sort of that we can take with us or that we can sort of snack quickly. The thing with cooking is interesting because there's a bit of both. On the one hand, yes, there's less cooking and we want more delivery and things that are sort of already made, but at the same time, there's meal kits are a really interesting thing where you keep this sort of like joy or rediscovery of cooking, but at the same time, it's super convenient. You don't have to go to a supermarket. You don't even have to think what to cook. They give you the recipe, they send you the ingredients, and then you just feel great about cooking. So I think it's just a way of how we're getting used to things and how the world changes, basically. It's not just a question of laziness, but...
Okay. Steve, do you have a different view on convenience, or anything from the beverage side?
No, I was just kind of thinking when you said, the box comes and it tells you what to do. For my wife, the biggest hassle is always trying to figure out what to cook at night. So when somebody takes that away from you, that's a huge relief. But I think it's also, we're more active. Household sizes are smaller, so it makes less sense to cook. commuting more, we're doing more things,
Changing
living
demographics.
longer.
More people are working.
Yeah, I mean, it's just, there's a lot of pressure for convenience that's pushing these things and making these things necessary.
Okay. We're going to open it up pretty shortly, so if you want to start thinking, it's not meant to be just questions and answers. We're very interested in your opinions and foods, and if you think or disagree on something we're saying, please feel free to call us idiots and call us out on that and challenge us. Tom, we've been talking about health and wellness, and again, we've been talking about cycles. How on earth do companies stay on top of all of this? Back in the day, you could just point to the USDA guidelines for Americans on what to eat, and that was gospel, or talk to your GP. Now everyone with their curated news feed can point to a study that justifies whether it's a highly caloric diet or a fat-free diet or a caveman diet or whatever, or a gluten-free diet, whatever you want. I mean, how on earth does a company stay on top of all of this?
I think it's
not an easy question.
Billion-dollar question, and an extremely complicated question, but I think it's a simple answer. It's be involved and be passionate and let that shine through. If you're part of the conversation and you're involved in the conversation, the medium for the conversation is easy to be present on. Social media is right there, and Gary went through it yesterday. Just be there, be present, be engaged, and have a strategy online. So I think you can then start to be part of that conversation and help define those trends. And like I said, it is kind of a blank canvas. The science has kind of gone to the wayside, and it's about an emotional connection with the definition of health. So be a part of that conversation and help to shape that definition. That's what I'd say, and hop online to do it. There's other channels in the traditional channels. Gary would say that you're throwing your money in the trash. I don't know if that's totally true, but there's definitely some truth to how cheap and effective social media can be to be a part of that.
Okay. One of the things that we've talked about, certainly in other client meetings, is the breakdown of trust between consumers and traditional sources of authority or wisdom, and whether it's companies or governments. And I guess I'd like to maybe throw that out to the audience as the first question. Do you think there has been a breakdown of trust between the consumer and the brands and the food companies? And if so, how do you go about restoring that trust? And if Pete's still in the audience, I'd like to call him out. Pete is the youthful CEO of a very venerable company, Bay State Milling, which is our oldest client here in North America. Do you want to put your hand out, and then the mics can go to you? What does trust, or the breakdown of trust, mean to you, Pete, in your context?
Yeah, so for us, the history of the company is wheat milling, and starting with the Atkins diet and the whole anti-carbohydrate movement. We spent a lot of time talking about how ill-informed the consumer was, and we weren't just doing it as a company, as an industry. We spent a lot of time playing defense. And about a decade ago, we made a mind shift, and we heard about it this week, this whole notion that the consumer is irrational. And that's not a problem, that's an opportunity. And we started thinking about listening more, right? And we are of a scale where perhaps it's a little easier for some of us at the top of the company to get into the field. And it strikes me, just building on Tom's comment, you have to be engaged, and most of the people in this room are of the leadership of their respective companies. And how much time are you spending with consumers? Whether you're at the farm and that's your role, or the middle market, at the end of the day, those consumers, they are making the call. And so I do think, Nick, that a couple things. One, you got to have a real brand. I mean, I'm all for the marketing side, and we have a lot to learn like everybody else, but it has to stand for something. And so many of the companies in these rooms, we're not unique. Decades old, centuries old. You stand for something, you're very good at things, you have a great story, we got to figure out how to tell it, but it has to be authentic, and you have to really buy into that authenticity and transparency and take some risk, but you got to be engaged. You have to be out there, and as soon as you hear yourself saying the consumer is stupid or the science is bad, that's a trap, because you shouldn't confuse irrationality with stupidity. And my 2 cents on the science, in the graph is fantastic on butter, is, and this is also our obligation in the food ag business, it's getting better. That's part of the point. It's getting better. There's a lot of great science that's coming at us, and you want to be informed. And it's hard to do. Have smart people around you. There's a lot of them that'd love to tell you about the science of food and nutrition. But the trust thing is, I think, an opportunity, right? I mean, look at the consequences right now. And those multiples, we are paying a lot for trust when we try to buy it. And then when we're losing our share, we're getting our butts kicked as a consequence. And it might be that just reallocate some time to get closer to the consumer, because you might find a path to pay a little bit less for that trust.
Great. So getting closer to the consumer is a way of restoring trust with your clients. Does anyone else in the audience have a view on that or want to share an experience? It's kind of hard with the lights to see if hands are up, but if there's anyone, or maybe on the panel, anyone want to weigh in on? No? It's okay.
No, I mean, we have actually done some work, and I'm going to throw in a little publicity for our reports, which if you're not getting, come to us, and
we'll make sure. Copies later, right?
We'll make sure to get you on the mailing list. But we have done some work on what we call online communities, and it just has to do a little bit with what Thomas was saying and what was being said about just how people nowadays interact online in a way that is with people that are similar to them and talking about things that are important and being part of that conversation as a company, but not as not on the defensive side, but on the listening side and sort of learning from. A lot of companies have done a lot of really good things. Lego is an example, actually, of turning it around by doing what their Lego fans were asking for. And I think there's a lot of scope for that. So,
yeah. I mean, how hard can it be, David, to give the consumer what they want?
Yeah, Nick, at our roundtable yesterday, one of the participants actually reminded me of a quote from a guy who I still can't believe you have never heard of, which is Wayne Gretzky. So you can all talk to Nick later about who Wayne Gretzky is. But Wayne Gretzky said, why were you so? It was asked by a reporter, why are you so great? Why did you lead, the hockey league in goals and or in the Hall of Fame? And he said, it's because I always went to where the puck was going to be, not to where the puck was. And I think a lot of us look at the marketplace and say, here's the trend, let's go hit it. And not a lot of us actually spend some time talking about, here's where we think the trends are going, how do we get ourselves there? Because if you're focused on here, you're too late, especially in this market today. It's how do I actually focus on where things are going and be there, or at least create products or markets or identify opportunities that are not, and it's very hard in a market where we're focused on daily earnings for public companies and day-to-day stock prices, but that kind of thinking, the guys that started the craft sector, the guys that bought into the craft sector were thinking about, not about paying 25 times today, what is this brand going to be for me and where am I going to be with this brand 3-4 years from now? It takes a lot of guts, it really does, and you're going to have some failures. But if you're going to want to be Wayne Gretzky, and you got to be there. You can't really be focused on hitting trends that are right in front of you today.
Okay, great. We have a question through the app, which I'm sure you can all read, but I'll read out to the audience. There is a flip side to every story. It seems like services like Blue Apron are very inefficient maybe, and wasteful in terms of packaging. Aren't people concerned about that? So I'll pass that maybe to Paula first. Do you want to talk about, you mentioned Blue Apron today. I mean, again, the trajectory of Blue Apron since its IPO, it's lost 70% of its market value or something. And stories about this, it's more efficient, or it delivers direct to the consumer, but there's a hell of a lot of packaging that comes with it. And so it's pressing this button, but it's like fouling up on other hot topics.
To be fair, I don't think they lost 70% of their value because of this issue. I think they had some operational issues that are separate from that. Yes, meal kits get attacked in terms of packaging because you get the I don't know if you've tried it, but you get the pre-measured ingredients, and so everything is packaged in little things, and so there's a lot of wastefulness there. And a lot of the companies are working on this. They're trying to do packaging that is more recyclable. They're trying to minimize it as much as they can. But the truth is, Amazon Prime, I mean, yesterday Gary was talking about how you're brushing your teeth and you order toothpaste, and people on Amazon Prime are doing that. You order one thing of toothpaste and it comes packaged in a big box with a lot of that plastic with air around it. And I mean, I can't think of anything more wasteful and more like resource intensive than how we're getting things, actually, those of us that do Amazon Prime, because you just order one and they come individually, and since it's all like the same sort of shipping price, no shipping price. So, I mean, I definitely think that there's gonna be some sort of like recognition of this eventually, and companies will be trying to improve it.
Okay.
Yeah.
Steve, it seems that someone wants you to have more comments on more last words on sexy. How do big companies outfox the small?
This is good for my reputation.
I'll read it again, I'm sorry. How do big companies outfox the small sexy brands? So how do, we've talked about the JVs and the collaboration from David, but are there other things besides besides M&A or with their existing portfolio? Is there anything they can do, or are they?
Well, the example that comes to mind for me is thinking, in the beer sector, Anheuser-Busch and some of these other large companies losing a lot of share to the craft players, and then going out buying craft players, and then leveraging their scale and putting out something like Goose Island at much lower pricing, and really putting some pressure back on the craft brew sector by creating some pricing pressure there that they can't match because they don't have ABI scale, right? So there are ways that large companies can push back. We've seen it in the wine sector as well, where the large players were losing some share for a while. They reacted, they got their portfolios right, and now they're kind of back to gaining share and doing okay.
Okay. We're in the closing 2 minutes, David. I'll give you the last word for my penance for not knowing your stars, your sport. Is there any last comments you'd want to share with the audience?
Look, I think what you're hearing is being nimble is hard. If you're a $20 billion revenue business, it's really hard to be nimble. On the other hand, partnering, joint ventures, a lot of what you're seeing here today on the venture capital side, Unilever's got a VC arm, Nestle has a VC arm. All these major companies have kind of got it at the end of the day that we need to be identifying some of these trends early. We need to be identifying some of the winners and losers early. And how do we do that in a way where we don't quash the entrepreneurial nature of what's made some of these businesses so incredibly successful and so exciting? So I think it's a dilemma, and it's an issue that there's no simple answer for. But what I'm certainly enthused about is the fact that for the first time in the last 20 some odd years, you're seeing some of the major food and ag companies recognize this versus saying it's a trend, it'll pass, I don't have to worry about it. It's a trend, I need to be in it. Rabo, for example, can you help me figure out how to do that? Yeah. And so that's, to me, is the exciting part of and the future of some of these big companies, because big brands aren't going away. I don't buy into that analysis, but big brands are under pressure, and at least they're taking steps today to work through that.
Well, with that, I'd like to thank the panel, and thank you very much indeed.